Layering is one of the fundamental techniques that I use for every watercolor pencil drawing that I create. And I want to show you today specifically how to layer with a smaller set of pencils. I'm using the set of 12. Now, layering is where you gradually build up the pencil in a series of light layers, rather than just putting down tons of the color, activating it with the water and then saying that's done. What I like to do is work in layers. So I always start with the lightest colors in each section and then activate it with the water, then the midtones, activate it with the water, and then the darkest colors, activate it with the water, before adding in all of the finer details and also adjusting any of the colors. So we need to be working through that same process even with a smaller set of pencils. So I think the easiest way to explain this is for me to talk you through drawing something with the set of 12 pencils. Let's draw a pair of shoes. Now, before we get started, if you want to draw this with me in a lot more detail, it is available on my Patreon. I have loads of tutorials with not only watercolor pencils, but also colored pencils and graphite pencils. For every tutorial, I include really in-depth instructions, all of the real-time footage, details of all of the colors I'll be using, sketch outlines, and the reference photo. I have a huge range of different subjects. Some are much faster, simpler drawings, and some are a lot more complicated, but generally more spectacular. Check out the link in the description. So let's start off by building up the lightest color in each section. This will be our first layer. So what we want to do is look at the reference photo. We're looking for the lightest color in each section. So let's start in the top left, and we want to find the lightest color in this section. And actually this is quite simple because it is pretty much all the same color. It's all this very light blue. So this is the lightest color. So what I want to do is put down the closest color that I have to this in my set. So I'm looking for a nice and light blue. There are only 2 blues in the set of 12, so I'm going to use the lighter one. And what I particularly want to do here is put down the color in as smooth, even, and lightweight as possible. Now, in terms of putting down the pencil nice and lightly, the main thing I'm doing is holding the pencil further back than you might expect. You'll see that I am not holding it really close to the tip, and that is to stop me from being able to press too hard. It's literally not possible to press hard if you hold the pencil back here. I'm also working in circular motions to try and get the pencil down in as smooth a way as possible. I'm not just scribbling back and forth with the pencil. So now I've filled in that little section at the top, I'm going to move on to any other area that also needs to be this very light blue. Now, when we look at the reference photo, you will notice that we've got a number of areas that is this same color. There's the light blue here on the tag here. This is the same color and here. But this section here, it's more of a purpley kind of gray. But I would say the lightest color that we have to this in our set of 12 that matches this color is still that same blue. So I'm going to use this same color to block in this section as well. And what we'll need to do in a second is put another color with that to make it more like a purple rather than a light blue. The most important thing that we want to do here, particularly for this first layer, is to put down the closest match. We don't necessarily expect that to be a perfect match, particularly because we're only working with a set of 12. We haven't got a huge choice of color. What I particularly want to do is put something down, and then I can adjust that a bit later on. So let's fill in all of the blue areas, and then I can think about moving on to the next color. I want to look for the lightest color in the next section. So I want to put this light blue pencil down anywhere where I think that the light blue is the lightest color in that section. So actually it is in quite a lot of areas on the shoe. And then before I move on to the next type of color in the next section, I want to take a minute to adjust that more purpley color. So in order to adjust the blue and make it more of a hint of purple, I need to add a small amount of red. I'm actually not going to use the red pencil in my set for this, but more of the kind of purpley red. This is the magenta. And I'm just so lightly putting the tiniest bit of pencil over the top of here, which when we activate with the water will become a lot more vibrant. You can see what a small amount of this pencil I'm putting down, and it will honestly make such a big difference later. So now let's look for the lightest color in the next section, and I'm particularly looking at this color around here, which is actually a very different color to this here. This is more orange and this is more pink. pink. Now I don't have a pink in my set, but I do have a red. And what I want to do is put the red down as lightly as I possibly can onto this section of the shoe, which then hopefully will become quite a nice pink when I activate it with the water. Next up, I want to move on to more like an orangey kind of earthy color. So I can fill in that around a lot of the areas of the shoes. And you can see that I'm literally just blocking in colors everywhere to get something down on the shoes. I really don't need it to be looking detailed or perfect at this point. I just need something. So let's fill this color in all the way along the soles of the shoes and then move on to the next section. And actually the next section is quite tricky. I'm looking at this area here. Now this is quite a tricky color because I don't really have a color like this. This is kind of like a very light greeny yellow, but also not very vibrant. So let's put down the tiniest bit of yellow. The only yellow I have in my set is quite a bright yellow. So we're gonna have to work with that. I'm putting down the smallest amount that I can. And I'm also gonna put a small amount of the kind of orangey brown that's in my set, just to try and tone down that yellow a little bit. This is the burnt ochre. And we'll see what color that becomes when we activate it with the water. Let's just quickly go through putting something down on the shoelaces on this side. Again, this is my closest match. I've got two greens in my set, a lighter green and a darker green. I'm going to use the lighter green for the shoelaces because it is closer. And then once I'm happy that I've got something all over the shoe on all of the lightest areas, what I now want to do is activate it with the water. And I'm literally just going to work one section at a time. The shoe is very nicely sorted into sections, generally speaking, working one color at a time as well. So I'm going over all of the light blue areas to begin with, and then I can move my way through the different colors that I added a second ago. I do want to try and make this as smooth as possible, but I don't need it to be perfect. We will be building up a lot more pencil over the top of this. So you can see how where we're going over the purple section here, how those two colors are mixing together to make a very different color to the light blue on its own. And you can also see how different the color becomes when you activate it with the water. So that is worth bearing in mind. So once I've gone over the whole of the shoe with the water, before I can move on to the next layer, the most important thing I need to do is wait for this to dry. I need to let it dry for at least half an hour. So let's work through this a little bit faster. And for the mid-tones, actually, I'm going to use probably quite a dark pencil. This is the walnut brown. It's the only brown that I've got in my set. So we've got some very dark areas like here. This I think I'm going to need to build up with more like a black, but I've got some what I would call more of the mid-tones like around here. A lot of the shadows on the laces are not as dark as other areas. They're much more of a mid-tone. So what I'm going to do with this walnut brown pencil is fill in both the mid-tones and the darkest values, but I can go back over those darkest values in the next layer. Now I'm particularly picking the walnut brown pencil for the shoelaces solely because the color that I would say is actually on the shoelace is more like a very dark green. I don't have the right kind of dark green in my set, but if I add a brown over the top of here, I can always add green back over the top of that to make it look like a darker version of the green I've already got on the laces. I think it's so important to remember that you don't need to make absolutely perfect matches to the color in the reference photo. We want to get it reasonably close, but also get the contrast right. The most important part of the layering here is to build up that contrast gradually so that we end up with a really nice and rich colored shoe. So I'm going to put some pencil all along here. There's the shadow all along the side between the shoes. And then I want to fill in a lot of the details on the other side. But I don't need to go too far into adding all of the details because when we activate this with the water, it is all going to get a little bit lost. But I do really want to map out quite accurately the shape of the shoes. Now on this shoe on the right, the laces are a different color. So I've used the brown to add in some of the mid-tones on the green laces. On the blue laces, the shadows are actually quite a rich and dark blue. Now again, it's not about getting a perfect match. I would say the closest color to match this dark blue is the other blue that's in my set. So I'm actually going to use that in the same way that I use the walnut brown to add in all of these details. I'm also just going to use the walnut brown to add in the logo here. I think it's going to make a much richer color if I can map that in now. And then I can activate activate all of this once again with the water. And this time I'm working, rather than one color at a time, I'm working from the left towards the right to make sure that I'm not smudging anything. It's very important, particularly if you're activating a darker color like I am here with the walnut brown, that you really clean your paintbrush very thoroughly when switching to, like in a second when we switch to the blue. So you can see how much darker this shadow is here. We are adding in the midtones and we are going to be building up the darker values in a second, but look how dark really it does go when activated. That is worth bearing in mind. So by the end of this second layer, what I have is a pair of shoes that actually looks pretty good already. It's obviously not got a huge amount of detail to it, and as I say, we're missing out on those darkest values, but already those layers are really starting to build up nicely. So once again, I want to wait for this to completely dry. Now I can use the black pencil to add in those darkest values, and this is the only color I need to fill in these darkest areas because it is the only color in my set which is darker than the walnut brown. So I'm going all along the side between the shoes, just building up some of this black. It's always worth remembering that the black will look darker once it's been activated with the water. So you can see how much better that's looking when activating on the logo here. It looks so much richer and it will be a much nicer base. So this is now the final time that I will activate the pencil before moving on to adding in all of the finer details with our next layer. So once again, I need to wait for this to completely dry and then I can start adding in the details. So I'm back to using the walnut brown pencil and I'm going to work over the whole of the laces on the left hand side, the green laces. So it's very similar to what I was doing with the pencil on the mid-tone values, but I now can add a bit more detail because we're not going to be activating this with the water. But you can see what a lovely rich base I've got before adding in all of the details. So I can look at each lace one at a time, really look at where the lights and darks are within that lace and map that in. And it doesn't matter that this isn't a perfect match to the laces as long as I get that detail and that contrast marked in. They're actually coming together reasonably quickly and building up the shadows quite nicely. Once I've built up the laces on the left hand side, I'm also going to look at adding in some of the details on like the stitching on this section here. Again, looking for the closest color that I have to the stitching here. So the closest color is actually the same burnt ochre, the same color that is the base layer, but I can press a little bit firmer with the pencil to build up a more vibrant color. So it looks like a different color even though it's not. I can then use maybe the black pencil around here to build up some of the stitching. I'm once again literally looking for the closest match from what I have in my set. It doesn't need to be a perfect match, particularly because these are quite small dots to build up these stitches. For adding in the shading on the laces, the blue laces on the right hand side, I can actually use the black pencil really lightly. Although I used the darker blue to build up all of these colors when we were building up the mid-tones, I actually want it to be a slightly darker blue than that. So what I can do is, as I say, lightly use this black pencil and that will create what looks like a darker blue. The colors pretty much mix together as we're layering them on top of each other. And once I've added in all of the finer details on the laces of the shoes, what I now want to do is adjust any final colors. So for example, I want to make the toe of the shoe here look a little bit richer, a little bit darker. Once again, the closest color that I would say is missing in this area is once again that walnut brown. I want to make a much deeper shadow here, and I can just add a small amount of the pencil over the top and you can see how much it changes the whole area. I can add in all of the details of the stitching on the sole of the shoe here with the closest color once again, which is the walnut brown, before moving on to both smoothing out the blue section here. So I'm just going over this area with the same blue, and I'm also going to use this blue to slightly adjust that bright yellow, which I think is looking way too bright at the moment. So I'll add the lightest layer over the top of here just to tone it down a little bit, make it a slightly more of a green tone rather than such a vibrant yellow. And then I can also tone down the yellow a little bit with the walnut brown, just adding a light shading over the top. You can see I'm just doing the odd little bit here and there to slightly adjust what's here. So on this pink area, as you saw, we used the red pencil to put down a very light amount and make a light pink. It looks a little bit too bright bright in the pink and it's also a bit too patchy. So I can use the earthy orange that I have to maybe tone that down, make it a bit of a closer match to the area next door. You can see just adding a light amount of the color, you wouldn't think it would make a huge difference, but even a small amount does really change that pink to be less of a vibrant pink and more of a softer color. And I'm pretty much throughout the drawing just constantly thinking about the most obvious color that's missing in each section. I can't stress enough that I'm not trying to make it perfect. So I could take a minute to focus on the shadow here. This is really just made up of the brown and the black. And then I can use quite a bright blue to just tweak and brighten up some of the blue areas. I find that when the light blue gets into the shadows, it turns into a much more vibrant blue. So I want to add this over here as well. And that is pretty much it. So it's very much a case of gradually building up the colors, always adding the closest color that's missing. So starting off with the lightest colors, looking for the closest match in each area, and then activating it with the water. Then the same with the midtones, looking for that closest match to build on top of the lightest color and then activate it. And then with the darkest values, in a case of a set of 12, really just adding in the black and really making that contrast pop and then activating it one final time. Then once it's completely dry, I can then start adding in all of the final details with my final layer and adjusting any colors, maybe toning them down if necessary. So don't forget, if you want to draw this with me in a lot more detail, it is available on my Patreon. And if you want to have a bit more of a basic overview of how to draw with watercolor pencils, including specifically the materials that you'll need, have a look at this video here. Happy drawing, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.